worked with in Kijabe. It's the same person. We'll get quickly started on today's webinar. So we want to talk about research integrity and data management. Again, I'm doing this as part of the Kenya Medical Association. I do chair the research committee of KMA, an alumnus of the initiative to develop African research leaders. It's based at the Kenya Medical Research Institute and Wellcome Trust Research Program. And I'm currently based at the Critical Care Research Group with an affiliation at the Institute for Biomedical Science at the University of Queensland in Australia. We'll get straight into it. So why are we making a fuss about research and data integrity? So good and credible scientific research leads to evidence-based decisions. And what do evidence-based decisions do for us? They ensure that systems are effective in supporting these decisions, and the decisions also feedback into the system. And this leads to just having improved clinical outcomes, which is the basis of doing research. Importance of data integrity. So clinical trials is basically the gold standard that we use clinically to evaluate new treatments against what you can call a standard of care. And we assess for things such as safety profile, efficacy, side effects whenever we do clinical trials. So you can already start to see the importance of data integrity in research when you talk about things like you want to know which treatment is safer, which one is more efficacious, which one has more side effects. And so you want your research to be very clear and your data to be very above board when you're conducting your research for reasons such as this. And we'll see some examples where research was not above board and the effects or impact that had. When you talk about standard of care versus a new treatment, there are four main domains that we generally want to look at. The first one is prevention, the second one is diagnosis, the third one is treatment, and the fourth one is palliation. The impact of discoveries on research. This is just a graph I pulled out from a paper online. And that on the y-axis, we are seeing the number of deaths per 100,000 population. And on the x-axis, we have a scale of 1900s and then a scale of 2010. So you can see in the 1900s, there was a lot of deaths that were occurring due to infectious disease, things such as pneumonia, influenza, tuberculosis, infections of the intestinal tract. And as a result of discoveries of antibiotics and treatments, these bits that used to take up a lot, that used to account for a lot of deaths, have drastically reduced, and we are now looking at a very different demographic in 2010. There's heart disease, which is becoming a really big problem, and of course cancers, which were at that time very small. There's still an ongoing problem of these infections. As you can see up there, there's still pneumonia, influenza, but it's markedly reduced as a result of, you'll remember, the history of antibiotics is not that long. Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin just in the 1930s, and it takes about 20 or so years to add a new drug from the time a compound is discovered to the time it's taken through all the research and it's released into the market. It's a pathway that takes about 15 to 20 years. So the first one came in 1930s. We don't have too many antibiotics. And antibiotic resistance is also now a big problem for us. So if we don't continue doing research, we are likely to start seeing an increase in whatever we've already worked on and reduced. So that's just a graph that's showing the impact over almost a century of what research has done. And what has this done to life expectancy? Again, if you look at life expectancy, the trajectory has also increased. from, just around about the mid 50s, slightly higher for females who experienced a lot of, you know, childbirth related mortalities, and the life expectancy is way up there. I think in Japan is a country with the highest life expectancy at around 89 and 90 years. And so this is again the impact of just, these discoveries and the research that has improved survival and reduced mortality that has enabled, um, the graph that you're seeing on the screen in terms of lifespan. Why should we continue to do research? Of course, we should continue to do research. There's still, of course, still a problem. Heart disease that you mentioned is still a big problem. Cancer is still a big problem, and we haven't quite eliminated the other, infectious problems that are there. So we still need to continue doing research. And for the guys on the course, the focus, of course, is more on sexual and reproductive health research, which is what you're focusing on. Another example, just moving on, is cancer. In as much as we're saying cancer is still a big problem, if we look at the 5-year cancer survival from the 1950s up through to the 1990s, and this is data coming from the National Cancer Institute in the US, again, you see the 5-year survival has drastically increased as a result of research. And if you were to extrapolate this graph to 2024, where we are at, we are above 62% for sure. So the trajectory has also been just an upward one. And this is again as a result of ongoing research, finding newer treatments or better ways of treating, more supportive care for cancer patients, combination therapies of chemo, radiotherapy plus surgical excision of tumors, and that is all as a result of ongoing medical research. Another example that we can mention here is measles, for instance. We can move forward. There you go. So in the US, the graph there just shows the cases of measles that were there from the 1940s, and then a vaccine was licensed in around 1966, and the cases just drastically dropped. And then later in the early 90s, late 80s, a second vaccine dose was recommended, and now we are almost talking about absolutely no measles in the US, at least up to 2004. The graph there shows there might be a bit of resurgence in some pockets or places where there's been a bit of anti-vaccine conversations going on. And the effect of the second dose, this is just extrapolating that part of the graph to just show you what was, why the second dose was recommended, because there was a peak that was coming in. This is data from Australia from 1991 to 2011, again, still measles. Looking at, in the early 90s, there were a good number of cases. And then the first arrow was when the second dose of measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine was added. And then in 1998, there was a measles control campaign among 1 to 12-year-olds. And once those two were done, you can see the curves are almost completely flattened for all age groups, whereas the campaigns were just targeted. And this builds into something we call herd immunity, which you might have heard a lot about during the COVID pandemic. So these are just examples of how research and data integrity has enabled us to improve survival and reduce mortality from ailments. Do you have any data locally? Of course we do. From Kilifi, we have data from Haemophilus influenza. The vaccine was introduced in 1993, caused a more than 90% drop in 12-year children, and eliminated fatalities in children under 7 years. So you can actually see that graph, the deaths just dropped, and that's for influenza. And so when the pre-vaccine coverage, the cases were about 60 per 100,000, and by 2004, there was almost 88% lower. So the data is a bit old there, but the trajectory just give the curves there just give you the trajectory which you can almost extrapolate to where we are at today. This is an old newspaper screenshot, I don't know what you call it, a photo of an old newspaper that showed the headline back sometime back in the early late 90s about malaria killing almost 1,500 people, 45 people per day in places like Wajir were dying of malaria. But this, as a result of research again, in 2011, I think the first phase of malaria vaccine we got the first results. The malaria vaccine is far from perfect, but it had shown efficacy of about 35%. That's the RTSS vaccine. And it is already looking very promising, and there's been a lot of work that has gone on into the malaria vaccine since 2011, and the research has already been published. There's a lot that is being talked about stem cells. It's made big news in across the world. Time magazine. This is data as far back as 2006, and it was talked about as a revolution for things like diabetes, heart disease, Parkinson's, and so the reason you're able to talk about things like stem cells is as a result of research, and more importantly, integrity of the data that led to this research. For those of you who remember, there was recently a human who received a xenotransplant from a pig heart at the University of Maryland Medical Center. This made big news in across the world. Again, this is also just as a result of research. There's a lot of genetic engineering and work that went in before the pig's heart could be transplanted. And this is just an example of where research collaboration, some of the preclinical work we did out here in Australia, and then it fed into the clinical work that happened in the US. And just goes to show the importance of integrity of our research data. Here, this is just an example from where I actually work. That's a photo of my boss. He's the founder, who has introduced something called the ICU of the future. If you think about the ICU environment, it's probably the least suitable environment for patients who are at the most sick, at the more extreme end of illness. You have all these alarms at the patient's head going off every single minute. Then you have a white bright light that is the same from Monday to Monday, yet our bodies were built for circadian rhythms. And what this ICU of the Future project did is it took the data, it quantified the noise levels. It's almost trying to sleep in an ICU is almost similar to you, a normal human trying to sleep, and someone coming with a lawnmower behind your ears. And what this research has now led to, as a result of looking at that data, it has led to what is called ICU of the future, where the ICU environment has been redesigned. We have the prototype done here in Australia, and it's now being rolled across the world. We are looking forward or hoping to welcome Professor Fraser to Kenya sometime later this year. The dates are due to be confirmed, but we might get to hear more from him about the ICU of the future. The other thing that I can talk about is the Bionic project, which is basically total artificial heart. And this is also very exciting. Just on the 9th of July, it's slightly about a month. And then yesterday or 2 days ago, 2 patients in the US received a total artificial heart. So the treatment for heart failure has generally been heart transplants, and that of course comes with its own challenges, again, which research has fed into trying to look at how to reduce donor graft rejections, how to improve um, the quality of the donor hearts. But what the Bionic project did was to develop a total artificial heart. If I can play this video. Yep. Yeah, there we go. That's just an example of what it looks like. It's you have two tubes, one pulmonary, artery pulmonary vein, and then aorta and inferior vena cava. So you have blue blood going in and red blood coming out from the lungs. So blue blood from the IVC going to the pulmonary artery, goes to the lungs, and then red blood coming to the pulmonary vein from the aorta. There is no electrical parts. It's a magnetic disc that just rotates, and it levitates or swings either to the left or to the right, depending on the volume overload. This is just to give you a snapshot of what research is going on in the world, and to get to these levels of research, the level of data integrity that has been inputted into this process is very thorough, and that's just how it looks like when it gets implanted into a patient. This was also tested in animals before it was tried in humans, and this is just an example of an animal that had a total artificial heart. It was pulseless. It survived for 6 days without a pulse. You can see it's a sheep there just living, having its feed. If we keep going here, this is another example of, again, data. We're talking about data integrity. When you're doing research, you want to make sure the data is collected in a very secure format. And this is also work again from that's coming out of a large collaboration that started during the COVID pandemic. So normally you'd have these kinds of data from monitors in the critical care setting. When you think about transposing data from these settings into an Excel spreadsheet or a database, whatever REDCap, whatever data format you're using, there is high chance of introducing errors. And what has now been developed is optical character reading technology, where data, I'll just show an example here, where you take a photo of data that's on a screen. That's just example, a screenshot is taken, and that data gets automatically transcribed, as you can see on the right side of the screen, automatically transcribed into a database format. This, again, of course, reduces errors in data entry and ensures that there is data integrity. And this is technology that is currently being trialed. And you can see it's already up and running, really. Yeah, so that data, what we end up with is data that's very reliable in a database format without any errors of transcribing. Why are we making a fuss about research and data integrity? I'm sure most of us have heard about the mantra publish or perish, which sort of seems to be the mantra that it leads or is used at the universities, where if you're not publishing, you're likely to perish. But today we want to look at something slightly different. We want to talk about publish and perish. And this is in the context of our research data and integrity, and we'll be discussing plagiarism in a bit. This is a paper that was published in 2007 in the European Molecular Biology Organization reports. That's the EMBO journal by Marie-Claude Roland. And she talked about publish and perish, and she was basically referring to hedging and fraud in scientific discourse. This is when the data that is, in research is not, you lack integrity in your research data, and sometimes you might be in a hurry to publish and get a paper out, but that could well mean that's the end of you. And you've seen some papers that were retracted from very high-end journals such as The Lancet during COVID pandemic, just because some people quickly rushed to publish data which lacked integrity, and some of it was just made up. Why are these concerns in research and generally in the society? Because there is demand for quality, accountability, transparency, and some of the biggest threats to scientific, call it scientific enterprise, but the discovery of new treatments are things to do with fraud, misconduct, and plagiarism, which we're now just going to have a bit of a discussion. In that paper, Marie-Claude Roland highlighted key concerns about securing and maintaining public support for research. Most of the research is funded by the public through taxpayers, whether it's in the US, the NIH, in the UK, or across the world. Back in Kenya, we also have the Kenya Medical Research Institute, the National Research Fund, which are all, also funded by taxpayers. So there is importance in securing and maintaining good public support for research. Of course, there is a lot of philanthropic people and organizations that also contribute research, and that is equally important to assure that there is integrity in the research and the data. For scientists, it's important to maintain ethical and responsible conduct and also improve communication skills. And she described something called from a deficit to a democratic model of data integrity and data sharing. And a fellow called Montgomery described communication as being inseparable to doing science. And when you're not able to communicate your science accurately and effectively, then people start questioning what is it that you're trying to hide? And that's where we start thinking about the concept of hedging, where you lack clarity or commitment to what you're trying to say, or sometimes you just use too many words where you lack conciseness. So science is very parsimonious in terms of the word usage. We are not writing flowery compositions. We want you to be as concise and exact and precise as possible. And these are some of the factors that have been cited as aiding fraud, misconduct, and plagiarism. Franzen described something called institutional misconduct, which is a community's tendency to restrict fraud to individuals that's acting to defend the entire social constructs and communication system of science. So there are different levels if you want to think about it. And some of the negative consequences you can imagine come up when you have this gets passed on to youth in training. And I think Bob Day did describe that actually. Yes, this is the slide where Bob Day just described that many scientists learned how to repeat all that is incorrect with respect to prose and style of authors before them, and this just establishes a system of error in perpetuity. This was way back in 1989. A lot has changed, and there's been a lot of attempts to rectify this and make sure that people are learning the right thing. And Roland, in a paper in 2002, just wondered why scientists take so little care in communicating their work when they've invested so much resources in terms of time and effort into gathering results. So communication is key when you're thinking about data integrity. I don't know if anyone recognizes this guy's face. I'm going to give a few minutes. Anyone who recognizes this guy, we can type the name in the chat box or raise a hand up and we will unmute you. There's probably not many people who recognizes the guy on the screen. So this is a photo of a guy called Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. This guy was Minister for Defense in Germany during the Angela Merkel's reign. I'm not sure how many people on the call remember Angela Merkel, who was the Chancellor of Germany. And he was billed to be the successor for Angela Merkel. So he had actually built a very good political career for himself. But unfortunately, that was not to be, because this is what came out in the news in 2011. They said the German defense minister had to resign because he had a plagiarism row and was stripped of his doctorate by the university that had awarded it, and it was not just reported in Germany, it was reported across the whole of Europe, which made big news. So, you can imagine he probably did his PhD 20 or so years before and never thought that this would actually come and have consequences later downstream on his career. This is just an example of how plagiarism or lack of integrity in research data can affect somebody at an individual level. It can also be much bigger if you were to think about it in the context. And this came out in 2014, where a company called Ranbaxy was accused of selling chalk instead of pills. And this became a very big case. And I think there was news about a settlement in court between Ranbaxy and the FDA. And you can imagine the impact of having chalk instead of pills being distributed to treat people. We saw mistreatment again during COVID when hydroxychloroquine was billed as the be it all, and yet it turned out not to be. So it's a matter of life and death if you really critically think about integrity and integrity of research data. A lot of times the universities find themselves at a competition between teaching and research. There shouldn't really be a question of competition because the activities are actually very complementary. The purpose of the university is to generate new knowledge through research and impart that generated knowledge through teaching. And I'm very glad that a lot of the learners on the course are actually youngsters in the university, and I must applaud the KMA leadership for taking the step in providing this course. And some of the problems that have been there that, again, Roland described were learners of institutions of higher learning don't take ownership of a scientific problem. There's little incentive to participate in a larger controversy or formulate their own subjects as a result of students being given a precise list of tasks or being given a subject and left to tackle alone with a limited ability to acquire soft skills. So part of the aim of this course is to sensitize you to some of the things that we've already talked about: hedging, fraud, plagiarism, importance of integrity in research, and managing research data. I want to bring this to an end and say the problem with fraud and hedging is that they deprive researchers the taste of, we enjoy controversy, debate, arguing about what treatment is better than the other and taking risks. And Gascoigne in 2001 talked about communication barriers creating conditions for manipulation and misinterpretation. Talked for about 40 minutes. I want to stop here. There's still probably one or two more slides. And one of the ways to address this is to change the levels of analysis to address different complexities, changing the scope of research to move things forward. For example, from a general to a more specific question. Why the best way I was taught was to identify problems or issues and then trying to find solutions for them. This is where research now becomes really important because you're trying to save lives or improve. Remember the four things we said: you're either improving prevention, treating, or improving diagnosis or palliation. And in 2000, Van den Boer just described new educational environments and methods to achieve these objectives of research. And this is the YRA is just an example of KMA's initiative into doing this. When we started this webinars, this series of webinars last week, I remember we said research is not easy, and we showed this diagram. But after having gone through the two webinars, I think it's very clear that research is actually very easy. All you need is for everyone who is touching the elephant there to describe exactly what they're touching and what they're seeing and work collaboratively to put together a picture. And that's how research is supposed to work. If this guy works individually, the other guy works individually, and everyone works on their own, you'll never have the full picture. But research is easy when we collaborate and work together and ensure that everyone in the pipeline is adhering to the integrity of the data that they're collecting. I want to stop there and I'll take any questions if there are. Thank you. I see there is a question from someone is asking, what is the name of the PhD scientist again? Why do we need this name again? It's findable on the internet. The guy was former former defense minister in Germany. He's called Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. And then there is a question in the Q&A box. This is Michael Jami, who is asking, there's a popular belief that funding for communicable disease research, especially in Africa, has been sidelined because of low profit margin, especially for big pharma. How true is this? This is a very political question, Michael. I think I'd rather not answer it because I don't work for big pharma and I don't know the real answer to this question. However, we must say that there has been a lot of efforts and attempts to ensure that the research that is being conducted becomes context specific and when you talk about low profit margin, of course, if you are to think about it, the person who is, holding the purse, this calls can determine or decide the research agenda, and this is just another indicator or reason why, as what you can call low resource income settings, why we should have more investment in research. I mean, no one has all the money that's needed for research, but there's deliberate attempts to make progressive progress or progressive steps towards getting to an intended objective. Research doesn't need stop-start where, one person comes in and says they want to do one project, then you change administration, then that project dies off, then the next person comes in and starts another totally new project. Or research requires, we say the pipeline to developing a drug takes almost 20 years. The political cycle or leadership cycle is just about 5 or 10 years. So if each person wants to come and have a project under their name, it disrupts that pipeline of research. So Michael, I don't quite have an answer, and it's a controversy I'm not sure I want to participate in by saying that research in Africa has actually been sidelined. Of course, there has been previous cases where there was misconduct, where there was lack of ethics, and this led to development of very different various ethic standards against which research is nowadays governed. The Belmont Report and the International Conference on Harmonization of Good Clinical and Laboratory Practices. For those are just examples. And nowadays, any research before it's conducted in Africa, again, it has to be subjected to both. Remember last week we talked about both the scientific review and the ethical review, where the scientific review is looking at, is this research actually necessary, and is this the right population to actually do this research on? And the ethics review is actually looking at the question of safety to the participants. So Michael, I hope I've tried to respond to that. Apart from malaria vaccine trial, have there been other clinical trials done in Kenya? Of course, there's been a good number of them. We just saw an example of hepatitis B vaccine that was done in Kilifi earlier in the slides as I was presenting. There's a good number of clinical trials. There was a fluid resuscitation trial in septic shock that was conducted. There was an oxygen supplementation trial. There's been studies looking at malnutrition, and these are just examples I'm giving because I was personally involved in. So there's been a lot of trials, and aside from malaria vaccine, there's a whole pile of other trials. The current treatment for malaria that's called artemisinin, the coartem-based treatments, they originated from a research that was called Aquamat, which was conducted across multiple sites, and Kenya was also one of the sites involved in that trial that was led by Professors Nick White and Nick Day and Arjen Dondrop. So there have been a lot of, and there still are a lot of clinical trials that are going on in Kenya. There's a question there. Is that a question someone has put in the chat? Carol Kimanzi says, a medical doctor looking for research opportunities. In case you know any, kindly assist. Caroline, I think there is really no straight answer to this. A lot of research depends on what your interest is. And research is an activity that entails you looking rather than being, I don't know if you can call it spoon-fed or stuff being brought to you on a silver platter. I'm not sure if you're part of the course that's currently going on. There's a few resources that have been shared around the course, and one of those is actually a free to access site called the Global Health Network that runs some very good training materials, as well as opportunities for, just participating in research. I'm just trying to find the link to put for everyone in the chat. It's a free to access website. It has some very high quality and good material. The question there from Michael is, where can I get access to papers from these trials? A lot of so when you talk about scientific publishing, there's, I think, what we call the Common Creatives License that a lot of researchers are now being forced by funders to make their research openly available. Especially to, where some journals are charging quite some high fees to access some research. But then, the question came about, where is this actually ethical if there is information that can potentially be life-saving, but it's withheld from doctors or researchers or clinicians in a certain part of the world. So the New England Journal of Medicine, which publishes a lot of these clinical trials, the Lancet, JAMA, a good number of those papers are actually free to access. In fact, I think all the papers on the New England Journal of Medicine are free to access. You just log on to New England Journal of Medicine, type whatever research, oxygen, Africa, the papers will just come out. And that's where a lot of the clinical trials that have informed standard of care have actually been published. And yes, I see Dr. Kigondo. Thanks very much, President. I see it's written there, subscribe to YouTube, KMA YouTube page. Again, we did a series of webinars, and these were recorded, and there's a lot of rich material that is already there. I think that is also just to refer to Caroline Kimanzi's question there. An anonymous attendee, someone has said, for those with cancer patients, you can always look out on the International Cancer Institute for trials. I see them recruiting quite often. Yeah, that's a good point you raised there. So there's two things about research. There's one where you're just recruiting patients, and there's another where you're actually participating in that research, not just from adding patient numbers to the research, but being involved in developing the protocol, being involved in adjudicating, looking at the side effect profiles, looking at efficacy profiles, being involved in doing the analysis of the statistics that's coming out of that, and being involved in preparation of the drafts of the manuscript from the research, and being involved in formulating policies that are coming out from the research. So there's a whole spectrum, and participating in research is not just giving patients a consent form to sign to enroll in a trial that has been developed somewhere else. We're trying to build capacity where some of the problems that Michael was talking about, being sidelined by big pharma. Why should big pharma come to address a problem that doesn't affect the demographic that the pharma is funded from? We need to develop context-specific research questions, and we need to think and find ways of having channeling or attracting funding towards this. So thanks for making that point, says anonymous attendee. Is there any other question? Peter, can you see anyone who's raised their hand? We've tried to address everything that's coming in the chat box, and also on the Q&A box. I don't see any other question. Dr. Kigondu, do you want to say something about the KMA YouTube channel before we sign off?
Yeah, and Chafasto, as usual, thank you very much. Dr. Diana, Secretary General, will close this meeting. But just to add on onto what you have said, I think we as an association in this research training that we are undertaking are cognizant of the difficulties that the African population, as someone has said there, and African medics are having in research. A lot of, we need to continue as the Kenya Medical Association in advocating for increased funding towards research. We are very happy with organizations like KMA and NACOSTI and all other organizations, including the University of Nairobi and other universities that do research in promoting research. But we are aware of the challenges that they face. Young people should start research early, and I think part of the reason people do not necessarily take up research is they think that research has to be hard, meaning the randomized control studies. I think people should be encouraged to address the problems that they face daily, and then join the association and other trainers in these programs that we are having, like the research program. Personally, I benefited from what was called the Keshobora trial. And as a young researcher, I was lucky to be taken through all the research protocols. We had a research protocol for an RCT that ended up making antiretroviral heart as taking over from single dose antiretroviral for PMTCT in the Keshobora trials. The trainings on ethics, the training on research methodologies are useful. And with this, with the scenario we are having currently, where we need to diversify as medical personnel, then encouraging people to take up research and even studying it is a good thing. So we, as you have put it, have partnered with EMJ and the KMA Research Committee, and we have carried out, I think for the last 3 to 4 years, a lot of material that we have uploaded to KMA School, which is on the YouTube. So I would urge everyone to subscribe and look around. There's a lot of material there. as we know, the school of the future is in the digital space. And in this week of the youth, we started off with a space discussing the importance of the digital space in learning and what the youth can contribute to. And one of them is to subscribe to the KMA YouTube page and get a lot of lessons that have been packed there by the Obonyo team and the EMJ team and the whole KMA team. With that, I want to welcome the Secretary General of Kenya Medical Association, Dr. Diana Marion, to close for us this meeting with a few words of wisdom also. Thank you.
Thanks, President, and karibu, Dr. Diana Marion. Diana, you're on mute if you're talking. We can't hear you. Is it just on my end? Or are you able to unmute Dr. Marion? Sorry, Kigondu, you are saying something. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, just make one more comment as I get in touch with her, just in case her mic is gone down.
Yeah. While we wait for Dr. Diana Marion to join, I think there's some very important points that the President has highlighted there in terms of what we are trying to do as an association, but all the efforts the association puts in can only bear fruit if people, the membership respond and sign up for, the example, the YouTube channel that the President is talking about, and some of the other materials that we produced. We are in the process of preparing to hold a series of workshops, which will be more technical teaching and learning sessions on a lot of the soft skills that are needed for research. One of the skills is usually biostatistics or medical statistics, where you want to analyze your own, develop some competence and proficiency in data analysis and interpretation. And so this will also be advertised again through the Kenya Medical Association once we have the program ironed out and the speakers and facilitators for the trainings. Was there another question? And yeah, all those were answered. And in the chat, there's nothing else that I can see that is new. I did put in the chat a link to the Global Health Network.org, which I did mention also runs some very high quality research courses online that once all you do is just register, sign up. They're pretty free to access. And the beauty of those is you actually get certification as you complete the modules. I see Mike again has asked a question. It says, thanks for the initiative. Karibu sana. Does KMA organize regular journal clubs? So Mike, that's a good question. And the direct answer to that is no. We don't have regular journal clubs at KMA yet. And you'd imagine one of the challenges of organizing a journal club will be finding stuff that is of interest to a very diverse group of specialists. If we start discussing something surgical, everyone who's not a surgeon will switch off. If we start discussing something obstetric, everyone who's not an obstetrician will switch off. So we have not had regular journal clubs, although that is not to say we cannot start. We can have and Michael, you're more than welcome to bring up ideas of the meeting on how you can propose this to go forward. When I was in campus, we used to have regular journal clubs. They were actually very interesting sessions where we used to be mentored by someone called Professor Bonnie Dunbar. And she is an immunologist professor from the US who decided to come and retire in Kenya and is currently the owner of, I think it's Karen Blixen chain of hotels or restaurants in the country. So she used to just like to discuss, science, and we used to have journal clubs at Karen Blixen, and it used to be a lot of good fun where, you present a paper and then you discuss aspects. There was always a take-home message from each journal club, and that's also important. It's not just a question of sitting and meeting to criticize science or a research publication. There has to be very specific learning points that the facilitators want people to take away. You tend to learn a lot more from stuff that didn't go right than from stuff that went all okay. And so a lot of what the journal clubs were doing were focusing on were on papers that, were probably published but had some bit of flaws. And more interestingly was actually papers that were rejected from publication with the reasons why they were rejected and comments from the editors or sub-editors on why they were rejected. So I think that's a good suggestion, Michael, that you brought up, and it's something that we should take up as a committee and try and see how can we organize an effective journal club that will, of course, take care of the diverse professional interests within the association and still maintain, the interest. I think the point to make there is when we are doing journal club, I was learning how to do it, the question was actually never, is this paper a surgical one? Is it an obstetric one? Is it pediatric? The question was the scientific process, what we're trying to do, or the research process. Does this question articulate a problem? And do the investigators highlight the methods or the justification? Do they give us sufficient background to show that this is actually a problem? And then do they justify their methods that they propose to use to address the problem? And once they've applied those methods, do we trust the result that they get from applying those methods? You can say, I want to go to Mombasa, and then you start taking the highway going towards Kisumu, and you might end up in Mombasa somehow, but you want to make sure that there's a very logical process to, this is a problem, this is the method we want to use to address it, and this is the result we got. And then the discussion, of course, is an interpretation of what do those results mean. That is what Journal Club is about. And I think from that perspective, we should be able to actually host journal clubs regardless of the diverse professional backgrounds and interests represented in KMA. And I see the president, thanks very much, Dr. Kigondo. He has also just put there the email to Nancy, who's the admin officer in KMA at the secretariat. If you want to join us, and I'd encourage you, Michael, to come and have a chat with us about how we can do these journal clubs. Yeah, thanks. Kigondo, you are able to get a hold of Dr. Diana, or I hand over back to you.
Yeah, I think
Thank
Diana
you.
is.
Thank you, Dr. Chapatso, for a very
yes.
good presentation. How are you?
Mzuri sana, karibu. It's 3 a.m. here.
I know, no wonder your voice is like that. So I really want to appreciate you for a wonderful presentation. I think you really enlightened us about the research and all this. And I think this is the second presentation you're doing in this series.
Yes. Professor Ndwati will do the next two.
Yes, so I want to encourage members to participate, and it's actually a great learning point. I think opportunities like these are very rare. So I would want to invite you to continue participating in these meetings. I also want to encourage you as doctors and as young doctors, the shaping and the designing of the profession belongs to us. And we want to really encourage you to join KMA. You are the future leaders, and participate in building the profession. So I really want to encourage you to be members. And our President Akigondu has shared the website where you'll get all the details about joining. So I think with that, I really want to wish everyone a good night, except for Dr. Chafat. So a good morning, but I think you need to rest a bit more. So yeah, thank you and have a good evening.
Perfect. Thanks very much and good night.